with Gottfried Duden, and I'm sorry to say he didn't show up. However, we're going to try to muddle through, and Doris is going to take over and help us with the luncheon, even in Duden's absence. Doris, do you want this to be handheld?
I'm just going to take this off of here. All these tall gentlemen. My daughter's my projectionist. Yes, Bob, I wish you'd been with me the last time. Last time we had a little bit of a problem. So it's difficult, but these young people are so well equipped to handle all those technical difficulties. So I'd like to thank everybody for patience with Mr. Duden, that he didn't show up himself today. I've been researching Mr. Duden for many, many years, and a little over a year ago, Don Graveman, one of the board members, had asked me to come and give my program on Lunch with Gottfried Duden. At that time, the previous time I'd given it was called Dinner with Gottfried, in Evening with Gottfried Duden. And I said, well, that won't work. So we changed it to Lunch with Gottfried Duden. Very sensitive microphone. And we changed it to that and decided that we would try to give you a little biography of the gentleman. So I thank you. It was that meeting that I came to that first brought me here in the first place. His skillful pen mingled fact and fiction, interwove experience and imagination, pictured the freedom of the forest and of democratic institutions in contrast with the social restrictions and political embarrassments of Europe. Many thousands of Germans pondered over this book and enthused over its sympathetic glow. Innumerable resolutions were made to cross the ocean and build for the present and succeeding generations happy homes on the far-famed Missouri. That was first written in 1909, about 80 years after Mr. Duden had published his book. It's absolutely accurate that his pen was very skillful, and it did a lot to contribute to German immigration to Missouri. Also, since the subject of immigration is such a personal one, many people immigrate for different reasons. Mr. Duden's book covered just about every one of those. Duden was the first German who gave his countrymen a fairly comprehensive and reasonably accurate first-hand account of conditions as they were obtained in the eastern part of the new state of Missouri. That was written by Missouri historian William G. Beck in 1919. Again, about 8 years, after Missouri had become a state. It was still Mr. Duden was being written about, and his book. He was born May 19th, or May 18th, 1789 in Remscheid, Germany. His father, Leonard, owned a large apothecary business in the city. His mother was born Katharina Hartkopp and was the daughter of a large iron foundry owner. The family was wealthy, and when his father died in 1795, no expense was spared in the brilliant young man's education. He finished his studies and matriculated early, and with a waiver and the legal age, was already appointed to serve at Dusseldorf as an auditor. In 1813, his military career began, which he took no pay for and was quite a hero in his activities. When Duden returned to the courtrooms in Volheim and Rittgraf, he was bombarded daily with growing accounts of crime and poverty caused by the severe increase in population. Subterfuge spying and political maneuvering were the rule rather than a rarity. Duden said Germany had become a country where hunger, avarice, and vanity have put in motion so many wheels. At that point, a plan began to take shape in his mind. This is about 1819, and he has decided that he's heard enough in his courtroom about the trials and tribulations that the people are suffering from, not only from overpopulation, but taxation and problems with the rulers and the government. I myself was in the midst of the evils of overpopulation, stimulated by the process of education and the events of the time. I had made the conditions of men and characteristics of the states, meaning the United States, the subject of many years of investigation. 5 years before his first arrival here in Missouri, on the U.S. shores here in Missouri, in the United States, Gottfried Duden purchased 139 and 26,100 acres of land. Using an agent, a Pennsylvania German named Danny Burnett, the funds in the amount of $69.63 were deposited in the United States Land Office in St. Louis on February 1st, 1819. Duden purchased this land at the going rate of $2 per acre in the southeast fractional section of 35 in Township 45 North Range 1 West for $278.52 plus interest of $21.94 for a total cost of $300.46. This is nearby where we know the little village of Duden is today, just across the Warren County line from St. Charles. Then in February of 1824, Duden met a Ludwig Eversmann. Eversmann had been born February 2nd, 1799 to a Berlin mining engineer, and he was a 25-year-old who had worked on family estates and eventually as an administrator of these farms since he was even 14 years old. Duden had been a bachelor his entire life. With Duden and Eversmann was Duden's cook, Gertrude O'Baden, 3 years Duden's senior, who would see to their housekeeping. On May 30th, 1824, the trio sailed for the United States aboard the ship Henry Clay in private cabins and landed in Baltimore on August 14th, 1824. By the 1st of November, Duden, Eversmann, and their housekeeper had arrived at a property along Lake Creek, a 30-foot wide tributary of the Missouri River, about 45 miles west of St. Charles. Duden is staying at the home of a young Jacob Hahn, with his housekeeper to take care of his daily requirements and Eversmann managing the farming chores on all the property. Duden was free to spend his time investigating and writing about the area. His thoughts first took shape in letters written to a friend describing everything from the terrain to the activities of the locals to the weather. The first 12 letters cover everything from the time of his departure until he arrived in Montgomery County. Quite often the mistaken story of the fact that Eversmann, being the only person that ever was accompanying Duden at that point, knew that they had stopped at the home of Nathan Boone here in St. Charles County. And knowing that and not understanding English, they left Nathan Boone's home, Nathan Boone being a friend of Danny Burnett, the agent who had purchased the land for them. Duden was asking permission and getting directions to the property. So he was indeed informed on where he was going. Eversmann later told the story because Eversmann didn't speak English. Eversmann had thought that they had been lost that whole time. And when they had seen the lights of Jacob Hahn's farm, figured that Jacob Hahn had just taken them in. What actually had happened is he had been taken in because Duden knew exactly where he was going the entire time. In the 13th letter, written the 20th of February, 1825, I cannot describe the impression that the days of wandering on this river valley have made upon me. One can travel hundreds of miles between gigantic tree trunks without a single ray of sunlight falling upon one's head. The soil is so black here from the plant mold that has been accumulating since primeval days that one seems to be walking on a coal bed. I have seen grapevines whose trunks, over a foot thick, rise up about 100 feet, free as cables, and then spread out in the crowns of the elms with their heavy foliaged vines. There are several kinds of grapevines here, and some hills are so densely covered by them that wagon loads of grapes can be gathered in a short time. It was too late to arrange for our permanent settlements before winter. For the first time, for the time being, we stayed with farmers in the neighborhood, big upon. Now, however, the cold season is over. This is one of my favorite parts. The cold season is over, and we shall try to transform part of the tree-covered hill slopes into a farm. I say the cold season is over. Those are the words of the Americans. I myself did not notice that it was winter. The woods never lost their green color entirely. Snow had not fallen. And the temperature was so mild that one only needed a fire only in the evening and in the morning. However, the inhabitants say that such weather is unusual. William Clark's journal that he kept, and that's in the Kansas Historical Society, does reveal that the years that Duden was here, 1824 through 27, were extremely mild. But we don't know anything about such kinds of winters, do we? In his 14th letter, written September 1825, he writes about the life of a farmer and how they go about setting up their farms. Everyone has at least 2 Negroes that make life easy. He goes on to explain everything from planting their crops to the social life, saying that money is almost unnecessary because everything is bargained for trade. In the 15th letter, written in November 1825, he tells of a prairie fire on his farm at Lake Creek, named that for a lake that is created before emptying itself into the Missouri River. He also talks about snakes and ticks. In the 16th letter, December 1825, he visits his neighbor Nathan Boone, the son of Colonel Daniel Boone, who had become so famous in the cultural history of America and whose name is used to designate various places. He died 3 years ago at the home of his son-in-law 5 miles from here. To be sure, he was a tireless hunter, even in old age, but in Europe tales have been spread about him that have no foundation in fact. Among others, I remember reading 8 years ago that he had been found dead, leaning against a tree with a cocked gun as if ready to aim. His son, Nathan Boone, is a state surveyor and reputed to be a very honest man. He lives about 8 miles from here on a beautiful farm on the Femio Sage River. His house is built of hewn limestone and offers the conveniences of an urban dwelling. Formerly, I had traveled about with him for several days in order to become acquainted with the region and the sale of the land. He is considered to be a good hunter. I am planning to go bear hunting with him next winter. By the 17th letter, written January of 26, he describes the lead ore mines south of him. The 18th letter, in May of 26, he describes the homestead he had created for himself on the land that lay due north of his first purchase, land purchased upon arrival with Ludwig's Eversman. By this time, Eversman himself had built his own house and taken a wife who had slaves, making him, Ludwig Eversman, the first German immigrant to Missouri to own slaves. Duden's cook tends to my house, he says, a cook tends to my household once, and a young man hired for several months does the field work. He has a cow, 2 horses, and he has even purchased furniture for his home in St. Louis. Not until the 19th letter, written in May of 26, does he bring up the Indians. I must tell you that no Indian has been seen in my neighborhood for perhaps 10 years. However, he goes on to talk about the Indians during the War of 1812 and how the settlers suffered. Duden talks about the massacre at the nearby farm of Robert Ramsey and tells how his grandson, at the side of his grandfather, said to his he sits up and he says, "Granddaddy, the Indians did scalp me." The only sentence in English in his entire book. Duden apparently wanted to report accurately, but not in a way that someone may not be able to, who may not be able to translate the English could read it. The 20th letter, in June of 26, talks more about the people in his neighborhood, including the Negroes and mulattoes who live among the whites. One of the longest letters of all. He describes the culture and the society brought by Missouri by the earlier Spanish and French settlers. He then addresses the subject of Negroes and slavery. This subject has such deep roots that no superficial investigation is even possible. With the 21st letter, he turns to much lighter subjects about bee hunters and sunbirds in the 22nd. In the 23rd and August 26th, he discusses the mosquito plague, which is almost as bad as it was the summer of 24 with the Great Flood. The 24th subject is the forest, and the 25th his garden, after he shares a story about a snake that had scared his housekeeper on the front doorstep. The 26th is about the iron ore in the area, and the 27th is the Indian mounds at Cahokia and other locations. The 28th describes the health conditions and then the state of the medical field. He is highly upset with the quackery he sees going on. By the 29th letter, he has returned to more difficult subjects, politics. He explains citizenship, naturalization, and how the legal and political systems works. He then continues the letter to discuss the issues associated with higher education. The 30th letter is dedicated entirely to the subject of weather and the climate. With the 31st letter, he announces his preparation for his plans to return to Germany. His neighbors ask him, why? Because he says he will return. But he insists that his mission has been from the beginning to write a book to instruct his fellow Germans about Missouri. He has rented his farm out for 3 years. Go there.
What's happening? I know.
He writes, people in Europe will not and cannot believe how easy and how pleasant it can be to live in this country. It sounds too strange, too fabulous. Believing in similar places on this earth has too long been consigned to the fairy tale world. This is something very important because this is exactly what happens to me. The last 3 letters cover his trip home. He has concluded with advice to immigrants who will read his book, with instructions on what to bring, how to travel in groups, how much money is needed, Duden has tried to cover all what he feels is the important information that he feels is necessary for Germans wanting to immigrate. He feels that hope for his fellow man can only be found in the far west of the United States, past the Alleghenies, in the new state of Missouri. In 1829, Duden at Elberfeld, in his own expense, he published his 1,500 copies of A Journey to the Western States of North America and a stay of several years along the Missouri during the years 1824, 25, 26, and 1827. Hundreds of such books had been published by that time, urging immigration to Russia, South America, and England, and even others to the United States. But Duden's format and timing was perfect. Written in the form of personal letters, it was as if your best friend was sharing his story. Germany was in a state of turmoil with famine and overpopulation, crime. He described the idyllic, by comparison, life of the American country farmer. Freedom of speech, a land that could be farmed and owned if you were willing to work hard, and abundant food for your family. These were only dreams in Germany at that time. Duden's book was an instant success. His suggestion to travel in groups created immigration societies, first off, and brought over 1,000 Germans to St. Charles, Warren, and Franklin counties in the years 1832 and 33. And that was just the beginning. Subsequent editions by Duden and various German immigration societies helped the sales soar. Soon the wave grew even larger as the first immigrants began to write their own letters home. A member of the Soligen Society, Frederick Steinus, writes, "While things here are not all as Duden has said, in some ways they are even better." Letters were circulated after church on Sunday, amongst the breweries and in the wine gardens, and from village to village. Within 30 years, by 1850, Missouri was the 6th largest of all U.S. states in the percentage of German-born and German descendants, and St. Charles was one of the largest of those German counties of all. But he was not without his naysayers. There were those that found ways to criticize Duden in his book. He felt attacked and wrote a very defensive addendum to his subsequent editions. He felt misunderstood, as if he had written his book in Greek. He said people refused to take his advice and then blamed him when things didn't go right. He felt unsafe and decided there was no way that he could return to the United States. He lived out his remaining years without any idea of what the effects of his small book on the U.S., Missouri, and St. Charles County had. He died on October 29, 1856, and was buried in the Old City Cemetery at Bonn in Germany. Duden's enthusiastic book fits its time with the gratified neatness, for it first appeared in 1829, just as the Auswanderung to America were beginning to revive. But it was not only met a need and suited an atmosphere, it helped appreciably to create them. Duden's descriptions of American landscapes and American resources were vivid, even lyrical. He found American economic, political, and social conditions better than those of the fatherland, and American intellectual and moral conditions just as good. The color, timing, and literary qualities of Duden's report made it unquestionably the most popular and influential description of the United States to appear during the first half of the century. It was an important factor in the enthusiasm for America among educated Germans in the 30s. It served for decades as a point of departure for hundreds of essays, articles, and books, innumerable thousands of conversations. It was a landmark in the life and memory of many Auswanderer. Mag Walker in Germany and the Immigration wrote that in 1964. It still held true over 100 years after the book was published. Charles Van Ravensway, in his epic The Arts and Architecture of German Settlements in Missouri, wrote, "This timely work greatly stimulated immigration to the United States and caused thousands to make Missouri their destination. For more than a generation, Duden's writings formed the leitmotif of German settlement in Missouri, with the interpretation of his comments provoking endless discussions amongst those who came here. Many immigrants continue to revere his memory as the father of the German migration, and even those who blamed him for their misfortunes seem to have had a grudging respect for that kindly, guileless man." Charles Van Ravensway in 1977. Duden's book did a lot to create the German immigration that came here to Missouri. In about 20 years ago, in 1980, the State Historical Society published a translation of his book, and it is still available today. It's an excellent read, especially if you're having trouble sleeping. While it's very interesting in the facts and the points that it does share, it also, it's written in such a manner that at times it's very difficult. Gary, would you like to help me? We're going to share a little bit as we did before with Duden, because I have a... No, there's not one there.
For Sanford.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment? It's amazing that this one book did so much to encourage the Germans to come over. When I went to Japan about 10 years ago, I was in one of the western cities, and one of the young men took me to see a house. And of course you've read the works of Lucinio Hearn, who lived in Japan in the 1860s, and his books were very popular in America. I had to admit, I'm sorry, I've never heard of the guy. However, you go to Germany, and particularly in that area around Gießen, the area, you talk about Duden, they know who he is. They know the guy.
When I visited Germany 2 years ago, and I was in Bremen, the Bremen Immigration Center is a beautiful, beautiful museum that I urge anybody visiting Germany to visit. They have the greatest bookstore too, by the way. And a German friend of mine was there that day, and they have one section that, books that is in German, and then they have books in almost every single language. Of course, I was really happy that day because I found a really good book in English that I could read. And Rolf found a good book about immigration in German, and I was thumbing through it, and Duden was still being written about today in Germany about his cause and effect on immigration.
It's amazing. 3 Meilen unterhalb St. Charles on der nördlichen Seite der Missouri, dort wo das Missouri-Tal sich mit dem Mississippi-Tal verbindet und sie, this is older German, this is nicht Hochdeutsch from heute, let's see, bei Taler begrenzenden Hügel in der Erde auslaufen. Basically, about 3 miles from St. Charles, on the northern side of the Missouri River, where the Missouri Valley meets the Mississippi Valley, there rise large hills out of the earth. Let's see, boys. Die Franzosen nennen sie Les Mamels. Mamel Hills. It's talking about the Indian mounds in St. Charles County. There's a whole section. This is from letter 27. And this is Doris's copy that she picked up of an 1829 first edition of Duden. So she's got a treasure here on her own.
I wanted to go straight to the source.
Yeah. So that's his Duden, talking about St. Charles, Mamel Hills, and the Indians. It's amazing when he writes about, the bears and the massacre at Ramsey Farm and the mosquitoes and the floods and the cholera and the diphtheria. And they still come over. They still arrive. So fantastic that he came, and a great influence on St. Charles. Good job, Doris.
Okay. Any questions about Duden, my favorite subject? Yes, John?
Doris, the first time I went to Lewisburg and mentioned Gottfried Duden, somehow I didn't know much about him, but I knew that he played a role in immigration. But they kept telling me that he was an educational expert and he'd written a lot of books on education. Was that another Gottfried?
No, that was the same one, but there is also in Germany the Duden. The Duden being our version of a Webster's dictionary. In Germany, a lot of times the dictionary just says Duden on the front. It's not the same person. Those are descendants, the publishers, the originators of the Duden, distant cousins of Gottfried.
They were experts in
And they were that. But he did write, after he was in Missouri, since he lived out his life over there, he did write some other pieces. He wrote several other books about immigration, but most of the ones that he wrote later in life, he gave up writing about immigration. Yes, any other questions? So now we all know who Gottfried Duden was.
Thank you, Doris.